Imagine sitting in a therapist's office. You're completely convinced that your pain, your specific struggles, and your reasons for making, really destructive choices are entirely unique to you.
Right. You think you're the exception.
Exactly. You've built this entire fortress of justification around your behavior, and then the therapist slides a standard clinical textbook across the desk.
Oh, man.
Yeah, they open it to a random page, and you realize that your deepest, most fiercely defended private thoughts are just printed right there.
As a generic symptom.
Yes, literally a bullet point in a guidebook of 50 standard excuses.
It completely shatters the illusion, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, it is a profound and, frankly, terrifying stripping away of the ego.
It really is. And that terrifying realization is the anchor for what we are doing today. Welcome to this deep dive. I'm so glad you could join us for this one.
Yeah, this is a heavy one, but an important one.
Definitely. Because what we are looking at today does not come from a sterile medical journal. We aren't looking at detached clinical studies filled with pie charts or population statistics.
No, not at all.
What we have is a raw, deeply personal, and completely unfiltered essay. It's simply titled Habit.
And what makes this text so incredibly vital for you to understand is its perspective. I mean, this is written from the inside out.
Right.
It's written by someone who spent 40 years tumbling toward rock bottom before finally initiating the grueling process of getting clean.
40 years. Just let that sink in. So the mission for us today is to explore the visceral, lived experience of addiction. We really want to understand the brutal, isolating, but ultimately transformative reality of stepping away from the substance.
Which is an enormous undertaking.
It is. It's a concept often referred to in Dutch as afkicken.
Kick. Yeah.
Right, which translates roughly to kicking the habit, but it implies something much bigger. It implies the total systemic physical and mental rewiring of a life.
It's not just stopping, it's rebuilding.
Exactly. We are going to make afkicken the core lens through which we view this entire journey today.
What's fascinating here is the sheer duality of the source material. I mean, it reads as a highly vulnerable confession, sure.
Yeah, very vulnerable.
But also as a remarkably analytical, almost forensic breakdown of the addicted brain. The author is doing something incredibly difficult here.
Which is what?
They are stepping outside of themselves, to examine the actual mechanics of their own hijacked mind.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the author doesn't start with the tragedy of rock bottom. They don't start with the dramatic intervention scene like you'd see in a movie.
No, they start way back at the beginning.
Right, in their youth. And they describe their early relationship with addictive behavior as feeling like a sport.
Yes, a sport. When I read that, it struck me as a very specific, highly revealing choice of words for adolescent psychology.
It's wild, right? Because they write about constantly testing themselves. They ask this internal question like, when am I strong enough to quit?
Testing the limits.
Yeah. It started in their teens with binge drinking almost every single day. And they describe these chaotic, messy scenes, falling off bar stools, standing up, sitting down again, and continuing to drink as if nothing out of the ordinary just happened.
And they're laughing about it.
Yeah.
That's the crazy part.
They are laughing. They even state that puking was just normal.
It was perceived as the biological toll you paid to keep playing the game, like sore muscles after a workout.
But wait, I have to push back on this framing. Because they also calls this a sport, and they refer to this phase as climbing to the top of stupidity.
Right.
But think about how we, as a society, view sports. We view them as the ultimate test of discipline, of boundaries, of control.
Sure, yeah.
A marathon runner pushes their body to the absolute limit through pure focused willpower. But what the author is describing here isn't a discipline test of strength.
Not at all.
It sounds like they are playing a game of chicken with their own brain. They're gambling with their willpower. So why would the author, or any teenager in that situation, frame this as a sport? It seems like a massive psychological trap.
Well, it is the ultimate psychological trap, and it relies entirely on the illusion of conscious control.
The illusion.
Exactly. Think about it. In a sport, you have rules. You have a referee. And most importantly, you believe you can hear the whistle blow and simply walk off the field.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
By framing their binge drinking and drug use as a test of strength, the author was telling themselves that they were the athlete, the one in charge of all the variables.
Like they can stop whenever they wanted.
Right. Climbing to the top of stupidity requires effort. It requires a twisted kind of ambition,
So the ambition is to see how far you can push the human body before it breaks. But the trap is believing you can stop the momentum at will.
Precisely. And this extreme behavior is normalized through social reinforcement.
The laughing friends.
Yes. Think about the scene they describe, falling off a bar stool and puking. In a vacuum, if a person collapses and vomits, that is a blaring physiological alarm system.
Right, it means you're poisoned.
It signals acute neurological impairment. You are literally poisoned. But in the context of the sport, when you fall and the whole bar laughs and your friends cheer you on,
That alarm bell is just silenced.
it stops being a medical warning sign and instantly becomes a badge of honor. It's a shared joke.
The author mentions moving on to doing every drug over the top in their 20s. They note that weed was initially just recreational.
But the groundwork for all of that, that insatiable drive to push the limits, it was laid at the bottom of those beer glasses.
Because if it's a sport, your conscious mind is the coach. But addiction doesn't respect the coach.
No, it doesn't even recognize the coach. While you think you're training for a sport, your brain's physical chemistry is being fundamentally rewired.
Without your consent.
Without your consent and
Mhm.
completely without your awareness. You think you were testing the strength of your engine, but you were actually just systematically dismantling your own brakes.
Dismantling the brakes. That is a terrifying image. Which brings us to the actual physical mechanism of that dismantled brake system.
The biology of it, yeah.
If the early days were a game with friends, the biological rules of that game changed very, very quickly. The author brings up something terrifying about the nature of the high itself.
The elusive first high.
Right. They state unequivocally that users base their entire addiction on the very first time they used.
It's a cornerstone concept in addiction.
Mm-hmm.
But the author cuts right to the biological reality of it here.
Yeah, you keep trying to feel that ultimate pristine high over and over again, and you fail. Every single time. Unless, of course, you use more of the substance. And then more.
It's a chase you can never win.
I really want to dig into the science of this for a second, because the author points to a specific part of the brain responsible for this impossible chase.
The accumbens?
Right, they call it a trick, played by the accumbens. They describe it as a weird little loop we all have. I'm trying to wrap my head around this. If the first high is never achievable again, why doesn't the brain realize that after the 10th or 50th time and just stop craving it?
That is the million-dollar question.
Why does it fall for the same trick for 40 years?
Well, to understand that, we have to look really closely at the nucleus accumbens. This is a highly critical structure deep within the brain's reward circuit.
Okay, the reward circuit.
Now, from an evolutionary standpoint, its primary job is not to process synthetic chemicals, obviously.
Obviously not.
Its job is to process natural rewards and reinforce behaviors that keep us and our species alive.
Like what? Eating.
Eating calorie-dense food, hydrating, reproducing, social bonding. When you do those things, the nucleus accumbens floods your brain with dopamine.
It sends a message.
Exactly. A message that says, that felt good, that was vital for our survival, remember how you did that, and do it again.
Okay, so it's essentially the brain's internal reinforcement trainer. But drugs hijack that natural trainer.
They don't just hijack it. They completely overwhelm its capacity.
How so?
When you introduce a highly addictive substance, it releases a flood of dopamine that dwarfs the natural rewards of everyday life by an order of magnitude.
Oh, wow. So it's not even close.
Not even close. If eating a piece of cake gives you a dopamine spike of, let's say, 50 units, a heavy narcotic might blast the system with 1,000 units.
1,000. Wow.
The brain is completely shocked by this massive, unnatural chemical spike. It perceives it as an imbalance, a threat to homeostasis.
So it's too much of a good thing, biologically speaking.
Exactly. So what does a biological system do when it's overwhelmed? To protect itself, it downregulates.
Meaning what exactly?
It actively shuts down and removes its own natural dopamine receptors to dampen the noise.
Wait, the physical architecture of the brain actually changes. The landing pads for the dopamine are literally removed.
Yes, literally removed. So the next time you take the drug, your baseline capacity to receive joy has dropped.
Oh, that is so bleak.
It is. That first high, that massive, unmitigated flood hitting a full set of fresh receptors can never be recreated.
Because the physical receptors are no longer there to catch the chemical.
Exactly. The weird little loop the author mentions is the tragedy of the nucleus accumbens screaming for a massive reward it remembers perfectly.
But lacking the hardware to process it?
Yes, you are biologically chasing a ghost.
That perfectly reframes the conversation around a fiction. This shows so clearly that addiction is not a moral failing, or just a simple lack of willpower.
No, that's such an outdated way to view it.
You aren't just making a bad, selfish choice. You are fighting a hijacked biological survival system that believes it needs this chemical more than food or water.
Your brain thinks you will die without it.
The author makes this tragic admission regarding their current state. For them, there's absolutely no such thing as recreational use anymore.
Because the brake pads are gone.
The brake pads are completely gone. They say it feels like everything they do turns into an addiction, even writing this very essay.
Wow.
Yeah, they say writing it feels unstoppable, that they are giving it 100%. They've been clean for almost 4 years, but they write, still feels like yesterday. You never forget your first high.
That is the enduring echo of the nucleus accumbens right there. 4 years of absolute sobriety, and the chemical memory of that first spike is still perfectly preserved.
Just waiting in the dark.
Waiting in the dark. It highlights why the process of a kick-in, of getting clean and maintaining that sobriety, isn't a one-time event.
It's a lifelong state of immense constant vigilance.
It truly is.
And what's worse is that the biological loop of the accumbens isn't the only cycle trapping the user. It's working in tandem with a broader, more crushing psychological cycle.
The depression loop?
Yes. The author actually provides a hand-drawn visual in the text, and it's devastating in its simplicity.
I remember that drawing.
It's just 2 words with arrows pointing to each other in a closed circle. The word depression has an arrow pointing to drugs, and the word drugs has an arrow pointing back to depression.
The ultimate chicken or egg paradox of addiction.
The author asks it so plainly, they write, you use drugs because you are depressed, and you are depressed because you use drugs. Does this make any sense?
If we really unpack that paradox, we have to look at the author's profound revelation about trauma.
Yeah, the books.
Right. In a lot of psychological literature, and as the author notes, books will tell you that a severe acute trauma leads to addiction.
Like a single horrible event.
Exactly. But the author's experience was far more insidious. They described their trauma as sleeping.
Sleeping trauma. That's a really evocative phrase. Take a second and think about what that implies for you listening. It's not necessarily a loud, constant nightmare.
No.
It's a quiet vulnerability that you tiptoe around.
Exactly. It suggests that the trauma wasn't a conscious daily torment that they were actively analyzing. It was dormant.
Just under the surface.
Drugs, initially, were just a highly effective coping mechanism. They were a preemptive strike to ensure the trauma stayed asleep.
Like putting a heavy blanket over a sleeping monster.
That's a great way to put it. But, as the author painfully realizes, that blanket only works in the extreme short term.
Right, because of the biological downregulation we just talked
It's
about.
the dopamine crash.
When the drug wears off, the dopamine baseline is artificially low. So the
Wow.
depression isn't just back, it's chemically worse than it was before you took the drug.
This threatens to wake up the sleeping monster.
Which means you urgently need more drugs to put it back to sleep. Hence the inescapable loop.
It's a brutal cycle.
But here is where the author says something that sounds incredibly simple, almost deceptively naive at first glance.
What's that?
They say they read about this depression and drug loop in books, and they ask, does this still work if you quit? The whole problem seems to disappear.
The whole problem seems to disappear. The sheer audacity of that realization.
But I want to make sure we don't accidentally trivialize this. It sounds easy on paper, right? Just break the loop.
Stop taking the drugs, and the chemically induced depression stops.
Yeah, but everything we've talked about so far proves it is anything but easy.
You are touching on the massive gap between intellectual understanding and physical execution.
It's a canyon, really.
Intellectually, yes. If you remove the drugs, the chemically induced depression ceases, the baseline slowly recovers, and the loop is technically broken.
Technically.
But physically escaping that loop, that requires a person who is chemically depressed, isolated, and terrified of their own waking trauma to suddenly muster the energy to dismantle their entire coping mechanism.
While feeling the absolute worst they've ever felt.
Exactly. That requires navigating what the author calls the sinking watercraft.
Yes, the boat. Okay, this brings us to one of the most striking and frankly claustrophobic analogies in the entire text.
It's a powerful one.
I want you listening to really picture this scenario. The author says life is already like a watercraft on a fast river. Just navigating normal life, you know.
Paying bills, maintaining relationships, keeping a job.
It's hard enough, but doing drugs means your craft is slowly, perpetually sinking.
The structural integrity of your existence is fundamentally compromised. You are taking on water every single day.
And because the boat is sinking, you, the addict, become entirely consumed with one singular exhausting task, emptying the craft with buckets.
bailing water just to keep your head above the surface.
The author writes this tiny, devastating piece of dialogue between two people in the boat. Paddler 1 asks, "What is up ahead?" And Paddler 2 replies, "I have no idea, I'm busy."
That dialogue is a masterclass in illustrating the cognitive narrowing of addiction.
Cognitive narrowing, I like that term.
It explains how addiction completely strips away a person's larger life purpose, replacing it entirely with mere desperate survival and immediate maintenance.
You can't navigate the river, you can't look out for jagged rocks or waterfalls or even beautiful scenery,
You can't plan for 5 years down the line.
because you are just staring at the bottom of the boat, frantically bailing water, trying not to drown before sunset.
And because your eyes are locked on the bottom of the boat, your world inherently shrinks.
The horizon just completely disappears.
The author notes that their physical world eventually reduced down to exist in only 3 locations: the grocery store, the dealer, and their house.
Let's put that into perspective for a moment. Imagine your entire existence, year after year, reduced to a 3-stop commute.
That is a level of profound isolation that most of us can't even fathom.
And with that extreme isolation comes a very specific, aggressive paranoia. The author talks about biting the head off anyone who suggested that drugs were bad for them.
It's a defensive reflex.
And the reasoning they give is just heartbreaking. They write, "Drugs were the only thing in life that made me happy." How could they say something like this?
We really have to view that aggression through the lens of the sinking boat. It's an aggressive defense mechanism born of absolute dependence. If the drug is the only bucket keeping your boat afloat, and someone standing on the shore tells you to throw that bucket away.
They aren't just giving you unsolicited health advice.
Exactly. To your addicted, panicked brain, they are actively trying to drown you.
Wow. They are a literal threat to your immediate survival. If you take away the bucket, I sink.
That's the reality of it.
Which explains why stepping out of that boat, initiating the process of a kick-in, requires such immense, brutal honesty.
You have to admit that the bucket itself is what's punching holes in the boat.
But, as the author learned from a therapist, honesty is the very first casualty of addiction.
This brings us to a pivotal moment in the author's journey towards self-awareness.
Yeah, the therapist story.
Right. They recall a time way back when a therapist tried to help them get clean. It failed at the time.
The author admits they simply weren't ready, or maybe they were too young.
But that therapist did something incredibly profound that planted a seed. She explained that almost everything an addict says to justify their continued use is fundamentally an excuse.
She actually showed the author a professional guidebook, a literal clinical textbook of addiction.
That must have been a shock.
It was. And in this book, there were around 50 standard excuses printed out. And the author had this horrifying realization years later when reflecting on it, that every single word they had spoken to defend their drug use, to rationalize their pain, was literally printed in that book.
Imagine the psychological weight of that realization.
I can't even imagine. Think about how jarring it must be. You think you're fighting this unique, personalized battle against the world. You think your pain is special, right?
That your reasons for using are complex and deeply individualized.
Exactly. And then you read a textbook and realize your deepest, most fiercely guarded, defensive thoughts are just standard, predictable symptoms printed on page 42 of a clinician's manual.
You're a cliche.
You are a cliche.
It ruthlessly strips away the ego of addiction. The author initially thought, you're all wrong, and I am right.
But the truth was, their highly individualized rebellion was entirely generic.
The disease of addiction speaks a universal language. It runs the exact same script in millions of different brains.
And recognizing that you are running a script is a massive, painful step in accountability.
It's huge.
The author specifically calls out and rejects the common excuse of pointing fingers at others. They say, I could point fingers, he or she made me an addict. Sorry to say this is normal addict behavior.
That's a big shift in perspective.
They acknowledge that growing up in a drug habitat, there are always going to be reasons why someone passes you a joint or offers you a pill. That's just, in their words, how the scene works.
By saying that's how the scene works, the author is doing something crucial.
What's that?
They are removing the malicious intent from their environment. They aren't victims of a grand, targeted conspiracy to keep them addicted. They are just participants in an ecosystem that normalizes destructive behavior.
The scene is just the scene.
The power move here is recognizing that you cannot change the ecosystem. You can't convince the scene to stop being a drug scene.
You can only choose to remove yourself from it.
Exactly.
Which brings us to the absolute core focus of what we're unpacking today. Moving past the 50 excuses, dropping the bucket, stepping out of the sinking boat, and entering the brutal, terrifying reality of F-kicking.
The physical, psychological, and social gauntlet of actually getting clean.
Here's where it gets really interesting and undeniably difficult.
Because F-kicking, as the author describes it, isn't just a matter of stopping the intake of a chemical. It is the systematic dismantling of your entire previous existence.
The author talks in detail about their turning point. They note that they had already quit multiple other heavy addictions half a year prior, which is an incredible feat on its own.
Oh, absolutely.
But then they went into a 40-day commitment to kick weed, which they specifically note was one of their most expensive habits over the long term.
That's a serious commitment.
And they described the physical toll of this final purge. They said their mouth hurt really bad from all the crap they were taking. It wasn't just a mental shift. It was a violent physical expulsion.
They describe the visceral feeling of getting clean as escaping death.
Escaping death.
Escaping death is not hyperbole when your boat has been sinking for decades. You are finally swimming to shore. But what the author focuses on next is what I find to be the most undiscussed, underappreciated aspect of kicking.
The social costs.
The immense, devastating social costs.
Yes, because let's look at the timeline. If you started doing drugs in your teens and you are now around 40, your entire adult social network is built around the substance.
Everyone you know.
Every friend, every acquaintance, every routine is tied to the scene. Quitting means you have to deliberately cut loose a whole load of people you did drugs with for years.
It's a massive severing of ties.
The author describes the experience of quitting as a scary roller coaster. And even worse, a roller coaster you're in by yourself.
You are entirely alone on the ride. This introduces a brutal social dynamic, often called the leaver or leader dilemma.
Explain that, because the author explicitly asks themselves that exact question in the text. Are you a leaver or a leader?
Okay, so when you are deeply embedded in a community of users, you essentially all serve to validate each other's excuses.
Right. The 50 excuses we talked about.
The 50 excuses from the guidebook are the foundational laws of your shared reality. When you decide to get clean, your very existence disrupts that ecosystem.
You become a mirror.
You become a walking, talking mirror, reflecting their own sinking boats back at them. The dilemma is this. Do you stay in the scene and try to be a leader? Do you try to pull your friends out of the water onto your tiny life raft, risking that their panic will capsize you both? Or are you a leaver, aborting the scene entirely and swimming away alone for your own survival?
And the author's conclusion is a really hard pill to swallow for anyone with empathy. They say, who doesn't want to help friends? But there are times you just need to abort.
It sounds harsh, but it's often necessary.
You have to fiercely focus on your own sobriety above all else. It takes the tension out of the immediate situation. You make your firm decision, you sever the tie, and you can only hope they eventually follow by your example from a safe distance.
It's akin to escaping a burning building. You cannot drag everyone out through the smoke if you yourself are suffocating and blind.
You have to get to the fresh air first.
You have to. But executing that principle means accepting immediate, profound exclusion from the only community you've known.
The author bluntly states that quitting leads to exclusion, and it feels absolutely awful at first. They describe this phase of isolation as entering a tunnel to a different planet.
A tunnel to a different planet. Think about the gravity of that metaphor. Because the reality of a sober life is completely alien compared to the reality of the drug scene.
It really is.
On the drug planet, everyone is constantly validating the high. The currency is intoxication.
Yeah.
On the sober planet, there is no buffer. You have to face the music, the bills, the trauma, the boredom.
The boredom is a big one. And speaking of the friction of transitioning to that new planet, the author brings up a really interesting, very human side note about a habit they haven't managed to kick yet. Nicotine.
Oh, yeah. The vaping?
I noticed that. It's a moment of incredibly raw honesty in an essay about overcoming addiction. They admit there is still a nicotine addiction swimming in their blood.
That's very candid.
And what's fascinating is how fiercely they push back against the modern narrative that vaping is 95% less harmful than normal cigarettes.
They don't buy it.
They mention watching these scary YouTube tests comparing vapes and cigarettes, and they draw a stark comparison, concluding that vaping feels exactly like smoking weed for years. They admit that it's just incredibly hard to do nothing.
That hard-to-do nothing is the restless, residual energy of the recovering brain.
Still searching for a hit.
Exactly. The nucleus accumbens, though healing, still demands a quick dopamine hit. It's used to a fire hose, and now it's getting a trickle. Nicotine becomes the pacifier.
That makes total sense.
It's a vital admission because it shatters the myth that AF-kicking is a magical finish line where you cross the tape and are suddenly, instantly pure, enlightened, and devoid of all dependencies.
Like you're a monk on a mountain.
Right. It is a messy, ongoing negotiation with your own damaged brain chemistry.
Which perfectly sets up how we need to understand cravings, because the physical act of flushing the drugs out of your system, the detox, is just the very beginning of AF-kicking.
Just the beginning.
Surviving the aftermath, the months and years that follow, requires a deep mechanical understanding of how cravings fluctuate, and the author provides us a second visual in the text to explain this to us.
It's a vital visual. Anyone trying to support a loved one in recovery or going through it themselves needs to understand the day-to-day reality this graph represents.
So imagine a graph in your mind. You have two horizontal lines running parallel. The top line is labeled in all caps, craving. The bottom line is labeled neutral.
Okay, got it.
And running across this graph is a jagged, erratic line that violently spikes up past the craving line, then crashes rapidly down past the neutral line, up and down, over and over, like an earthquake reading on a seismograph.
A seismograph. That's a great comparison.
The author says this chaotic graph represents an addict's day.
It's a literal visual representation of biological panic.
But the hope depicted in the graph is that over time, as you force yourself to stay clean, the spikes gradually decrease in intensity. The jagged lines get smaller and less frequent.
They flatten out.
You stop going over the top, and the line starts to slowly settle, hovering closer and closer to that flat, calm, neutral line.
To understand exactly why those violent spikes happen in the first place, and more importantly, how to flatten them, the author dives back into the neuroscience.
Let's hear it.
They specifically contrast two fundamental brain regions, the amygdala and the hippocampus.
Okay, let's slow down and really break these mechanics down, because this is the actual engine of the craving. What is a craving on a neurological level?
Let's look at the players. The hippocampus is essentially your brain's filing cabinet and contextualizer. It regulates what you store. Your long-term memories, the context of your experiences, the timeline of your life.
Okay, the filing cabinet.
The amygdala, on the other hand, is your brain's primal alarm system. It regulates emotion, specifically fear, threat detection, and the fight-or-flight response.
And the author points out a crucial biological timing difference between these two systems and the rest of your cognitive brain. The amygdala is wired to react before normal cognition kicks in.
That timing gap is the key to surviving the whole craving graph. Let's use an analogy.
Go for it.
The amygdala is like a hypersensitive smoke detector in your house. The prefrontal cortex, the logical reasoning part of your brain that knows you are trying to stay clean, is the homeowner sitting in the living room.
Okay, I like this.
Now, when an addict in recovery encounters a trigger, it could be a smell, a specific street corner, a moment of deep stress, or even a sudden memory from the hippocampus.
The smoke detector goes off.
The amygdala instantly detects smoke. And because its job is to keep you alive at all costs, it immediately triggers the blaring alarm. It floods the body with cortisol, anxiety, and the desperate, overwhelming urge to use the drug.
Because it thinks you're dying.
Yes. The amygdala perceives the lack of the drug, the withdrawal, as a literal immediate threat to your survival, like a tiger in the room. This is an automatic, lightning-fast physiological reaction.
So the author is basically warning us, your brain is flying on autopilot. The amygdala fires an automatic alarm that, importantly, is a false positive.
A false positive, exactly.
It's a smoke detector going off because you burned toast, not because the house is on fire. It's a false alarm based on outdated wiring from when you were actively using.
Outdated wiring is a perfect way to put it.
Meanwhile, normal cognition, the logical homeowner, takes a few seconds to stand up, walk into the kitchen, look at the toaster, and realize there is no actual danger.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The prefrontal cortex is paddler 1 asking what's up ahead. But the amygdala is paddler 2, just violently bailing water, screaming, "We're drowning! I need the drug right now."
Oh man, the two paddlers.
The absolute trick to a kick in the entire game, as the author explains, is learning to endure the agonizing gap between the amygdala's false alarm and the prefrontal cortex's logical assessment.
They say it so simply in the text. Be aware to not react too fast.
Don't react too fast.
That is the secret to flattening that jagged line on the graph. You feel the massive spike toward the craving line. Your heart rate is up, your palms are sweating, your brain is screaming that you need it.
And instead of instantly giving in to that panic,
You freeze. You wait. You force yourself to give the front of your brain the time to log on, walk into the kitchen, and say, hold on, we don't do this anymore. We aren't dying. This is just a chemical echo. It's just burnt toast.
it sounds simple to say just wait, but it is profoundly exhausting work. It requires actively overriding your own deepest survival instincts on a daily, sometimes hourly basis.
And as those cravings do eventually begin to flatline toward the neutral line, the addict is left with a massive, deafening void where the drug used to be.
Avoid. Yeah.
The author states that being clean is practically a new addiction in itself. It requires a lifelong strategy, a constant maintenance, because you are left to rebuild your entire identity completely from scratch.
You've survived the tunnel, you've landed on the different planet, the cravings are settling, but now you have to figure out how to build a house on this alien world.
The author looks back at their past self, the person doing all those drugs, and they say, was this really me? What a moron.
It's a harsh self-assessment.
They clarify that they don't want to call themselves dumb, but they say it feels like they are looking at completely someone else. To explain this monumental process of rebuilding an identity, the author uses 3 incredibly powerful, distinct metaphors, and I really want to explore each of them deeply.
Let's do it.
Let's start with the broken chair.
This is a beautiful, striking piece of imagery regarding self-worth and redemption.
The author writes that getting clean is like finding a broken chair in a big pile of dirt. You drag it out, you clean it up, you meticulously restore it, and you sell it as new. They ask the reader directly, do you understand that everyone deserves a second chance?
What's profound about the broken chair metaphor is the inherent acknowledgement of core value beneath the grime.
Core value.
Addiction covers you in dirt. It breaks your components. It splinters your life. The outside world might look at you and see a pile of trash to be discarded.
Just a broken chair.
But the active kick-in is the painstaking restoration process. You don't throw the chair away just because a leg is cracked. You sand it down, you apply the glue, you fix the broken pieces.
And when it's restored, its history of being broken doesn't diminish its value.
In fact, it proves its resilience. It is a functional chair again, perhaps even stronger where it was mended.
It reclaims the person from the disease. That's beautiful. Next, they give us the metaphor of the ant colony.
I love this one.
The author describes sitting quietly at a picnic table, just observing normal ants going about their day. And they observe that if you were to pull one single ant aside and ask it what it's doing, the ant would say, I have absolutely no idea. Right. But if you zoom out and look at the whole colony, they are all working seamlessly together to create a perfect, functional world.
This is such a brilliant, necessary shift from the brutal isolation of the sinking watercraft we discussed earlier. Remember, in active addiction, the author's world shrank to just the dealer, the store, and the house.
Right.
It was a solitary, paranoid fight for survival against everyone else.
The lone paddler aggressively bailing water and biting people's heads off.
Exactly. The ant colony represents the slow, tentative return to society, the return to human connection.
Being part of a whole again.
In early recovery, you might not always know exactly what your grand individual purpose is on any given Tuesday morning. You might feel totally lost, like a confused ant just carrying a crumb. But by simply participating in society cleanly, by holding down a job, by being honest, by connecting with others, creating that human social net the author mentioned earlier, you become part of a larger functional whole.
You matter to the colony again.
You are contributing to the structure instead of dismantling it.
The final metaphor is perhaps the most modern and honestly the most mind-bending of the 3.
The AR one.
Yes. The author compares the act of looking back at their past trauma and drug use to using augmented reality, or AR.
This is a fascinating, highly evolved cognitive coping mechanism for dealing with a haunted past.
They describe standing before a sphere with a completely different world inside it. They use this mental AR program to look back on their past life. Here's how they describe using it. If a memory pops up that doesn't feel okay, if it's too painful, too traumatic, or too triggering to their sobriety, they literally swipe it away in their mind.
Just like swiping away a notification on a screen.
Exactly. But if a memory is important, something that keeps them grounded in reality, a lesson learned, they write it on a mental note and consciously keep it in their line of sight.
This is the hippocampus and the prefrontal cortex working in perfect harmony.
How so?
The author is actively, consciously curating their own memory retrieval to protect their hard-won sobriety. Early in recovery, if you sit and dwell obsessively on the guilt, the shame, the bridges burned, or even the phantom euphoria of the first high,
The amygdala will panic.
the amygdala will
Yeah.
absolutely panic, and that craving graph will violently spike again. The AR swiping is a conscious refusal to engage with toxic memories that threaten the present.
But they explicitly note that you can't just swipe everything away and live in denial.
No, absolutely not, and that's why they keep the important notes pinned in their AR vision. You need to remember just enough of the pain, just enough of the consequence, to ensure you never go back to the drugs, but not so much of the pain that it crushes your spirit in the present moment.
They say they keep the important ones in sight to go back to reality. And what a wild reality it is. The author freely admits that being clean isn't stepping into a perfect utopian world.
It's far from perfect.
They have moments where they feel like they are living in multiple worlds. Their mind will occasionally wander back to rooms full of intoxicated people, the ghosts of the scene, while they sit there as the only ones sober.
That's the gravity of the drug planet trying to pull them back into orbit.
But when that happens, they let their physical senses take over. Their eyes, their ears, their physical feelings, to ground them violently back in the present reality. They take a deep breath and just move on.
It's a grounding technique.
They even admit with stunning candor that some days being completely sober feels like falling into a well with snakes.
Falling into a well with snakes.
Yeah.
That is pure, unadulterated, primal anxiety that is feeling every raw emotion without a chemical buffer.
But, and this is the crucial triumphant but, they follow that terrifying image by saying, at least it is reality.
And that, right there, is the ultimate victory of a kick-in. On the drug planet, you are heavily insulated from the snakes by a thick chemical fog.
But you're insulated from everything else too.
You are entirely insulated from genuine joy, from actual purpose, and from the truth of your own life. On the sober planet, yes, you feel the bite of the snake sometimes. It hurts.
But you also feel the warmth of the sun.
As the author so beautifully says toward the end, we don't know what happiness is if we don't feel sad. Tears and laughter are a part of life.
To process all of this overwhelming reality, the author turns to writing. They ask in the essay, is this about you or me? They say getting it all out of their system is a necessary release, just throwing everything out onto the table in front of them to look at it.
Writing is a profoundly powerful act of externalization.
Getting it out of the head.
By putting the addiction, the cravings, the AR memories on paper, it's no longer a swirling, formless monster in the dark of their own mind. It becomes a text. It becomes manageable data.
But even writing it is terrifying for them. The author talks about dealing with the stigma, how every user or former user of an illegal drug is constantly walking on toes in society.
The societal judgment is immense.
They say it's genuinely scary to write about it, not even fully understanding why they feel so much fear. It's that lingering, heavy dread of judgment from a society that prefers the clean, binary X-ray of a broken bone over the muddy, complicated waters of lived trauma and addiction.
Yet, despite that fear, they still wrote it. They still shared it with the world. And in doing so, they provide an invaluable roadmap for anyone else currently trapped in a sinking boat, wondering if there is any point in trying to swim.
They certainly do. And as we start to synthesize this incredible journey, we can look back at the whole massive arc of what we've covered today.
It's been quite a journey.
We started with a naive teenager treating addiction like a casual sport, laughing at the physical toll, completely unaware of the biological trap the accumbens was quietly setting in the background.
The dismantled brakes.
We saw the vicious, inescapable loop of using drugs to throw a blanket over a sleeping trauma, only to have the chemical downregulation amplify the depression.
We navigated the terrifying, claustrophobic isolation of the sinking watercraft, where life's only remaining purpose was bailing water in a shrinking world consisting of 3 stops.
We confronted the professional guidebook of 50 excuses, stripping away the ego of unique suffering and demanding real accountability.
The scene is just the scene.
And then we entered the brutal gauntlet of afkickin', escaping death, cutting ties with the only community you know, standing alone on the roller coaster, and learning to sit absolutely still while your amygdala screams at you to panic.
The false alarm.
And finally, we arrived at the augmented reality of a restored life. A life where you are a repaired, valuable chair sitting at a picnic table with the colony, accepting that true reality includes both the terrifying well of snakes and the genuine, unmedicated laughter of surviving it all.
The author leaves us with a quote they pulled from the recovery books. You may fail before you succeed. Just get back on the horse again.
But they make sure to add their own hard-fought, lived experience to that cliche. They warn the reader from personal experience. The horse starts jumping when you try.
The horse will buck. The cravings will spike violently. The old scene will try to pull you back into the tunnel. The amygdala will sound the alarm.
But they follow that warning with this. I still hope you keep trying. You tame it and turn into the perfect team.
It's a message of profound, hard-nosed resilience. Addiction is the ultimate quiet betrayal by your own biology, but recovery, a kick-in, is the ultimate warring triumph of your own consciousness.
So what does this all mean for us? We've traveled from the flooded bottom of a sinking boat to the quiet, sober observation of an ant colony. And it leaves me with one final thought to ponder for you navigating your own habits.
What's that?
If getting clean, or even just surviving our own daily traumas, requires us to treat our memories like augmented reality, consciously swiping away the agonizing pain just to survive the day, how do we ensure we keep just enough of that broken share in our sight?
That's a deep question.
How do we hold on to just enough of the memory of the wreckage to remind us never, ever to sink the boat again?
It's the incredibly delicate balance of remembering the past without allowing yourself to be held hostage by it.
Keep questioning your own habits, whatever they may be. Pay attention to your automatic reactions. And remember, no matter how broken the chair looks in the dirt, it can always, always be restored. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.